Oh boy, this is a video I didn't really want to have to make, but I'm going to have to. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League's Endgame is just awful. I'm going to go through the good and the bad here, and you can disagree with me if you want to, but I have a bunch of reasons, and I wanted to judge this as a looter, shooter / live service, as opposed to my other review. And it is heavily disappointing because it does a lot of things right. It sets itself up for Endgame, but it is also suffering from the classic case of very little content. To explain the Endgame, what you are basically doing is going around in the main overworld, getting yourself the resource, I think it's called Palladium, that you can use to go into the Elseworld missions that are timed, and you have the specific missions that you do to be able to get the loot that you want. The problem is the missions that you're going to go and do in there are essentially the same side missions you've been doing for all of the support characters throughout the entire game, and you do that in a different biome. You are literally still shooting the enemies on rooftops, the same 5 or 6 different enemy types, and as you play and progress further throughout the game and the mastery levels, which is basically a way for you to continually keep progressing and make things harder and harder, things become bullet sponges. I thought maybe when we get into this end game, they're going to have some different missions in these Elseworlds, and then there's going to be something as we go further into the Infinite Crisis levels, but it's literally just an artificial grind that puts up the difficulty of the enemies in order to push our builds that little bit more. The reason why this is so grating is because if you look at any other live service game, you can say, yes, it's grindy. Yes, you play the things that you want to over and over and over again on repeat to be able to get the loot that you want to get. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. You are essentially doing the same 6 missions with no differences apart from a couple of modified changes, like when you kill an enemy, they explode. It would be like running 3 strikes in Destiny over and over and over again forever. No raids, no strikes, other additional strikes, which there's like a boatload in other games. The end game missions, it's essentially just doing the side content in the game with a different skin on it, and the enemies are a bit harder and there's more chaos going on the screen, because as you go further into the end game, you thought the main game was chaotic. The end game is on a completely different level. There's just so much stuff on the screen that even if you reduce what the UI is showing you, there's still going to be so much chaos, and it's hard to really tell sometimes where enemies are. It's also hard to, when we fought one specific boss, which I'll talk about in just a minute, it was just absolute chaos. I couldn't hit the boss. They were moving around all the time, and even though I'm playing on controller, it was just awful for what we were playing. It just wasn't a fun gameplay experience. It essentially condenses down the main traversal mechanic, because a lot of these Elseworlds that you go into, the biome is destroyed, so there's not the buildings that you can get to really quickly and traverse around, so it nerfs that flow, and a lot of times you're having to fight to get up above enemies or in the air to deal with helicopters, and it just doesn't feel great, and it really hampers the experience that I had during the campaign experience and the main overworld. The only upside to all the missions is the fact that there's an endless mode, where essentially when you kill an enemy, you get a certain amount of time that is added on, and you can go and go and go, and then the mastery level will keep going, and it gets harder and harder and harder. There's also a problem with that though, because when you get to the hardcore mode, you have to then find the portal to be able to leave on this hardcore mode in order to progress on. I spent an hour to an hour and a half doing this on repeat, because every time I get into a higher mastery level, I wanted to get out of the situation, and I either couldn't find the portal the first time. When I did find the portal, one of the modifiers ended up killing me, and then I ended up eventually beating it, and what I got for it was just a little boost to my main difficulty and a little bit of loot. It was really unsatisfying for the time that is spent grinding the game, which then also compounds on top of the previous issue with the mission design, because the loot in the game, it's so stingy. You'll do a side mission and get 2 pieces of loot for maybe 3 to 4 minutes worth of work. Now, I'm not saying hey, they should be showering us in like 15 items. But if I spend a whole bunch of currency to go into an Elseworld mission, spend 3 to 4, 5 minutes, even 7 minutes with some missions to complete them, and I get 3 pieces of loot, 1 that isn't necessarily for the character I need, 1 is an epic, so it's useless anyway, and then there's a legendary or a notorious. And I've got pretty much the setup that I need, so I'm never really progressing, so I just wasted my time going into that activity to get the gear. That being said, as you eventually make the number go up and you get into the higher mastery tiers and you start to put a build together, you do get your hands on the Bane sets. The Bane sets are pretty cool because it takes advantage of the craze mechanic, the venom mechanic in the game, to be able to put out some crazy damage numbers. But once again, that is nerfed by the fact a lot of the enemies, as you get higher and higher up, become bullet sponges, and then if you mess up with your combo at all, your build completely will fall apart because you won't have any combo to be able to get the additional effects to be able to do more damage. And if there's a lot of enemies that are, taking a whole bunch of damage to die, then you can't get things to roll quickly, and then you can see how it compounds on one another. And it's a real shame because the endless mode is actually quite fun if you want to try and push it. The build potential in the game is also kind of crazy because there isn't necessarily too much that diversifies the characters when it comes to what they can do. Maybe one can go more melee focused, one can do grenade focused, but it's just fun to be able to throw out a whole bunch of abilities and get things rolling, especially when I was using Captain Boomerang and my friend was using Deadshot. We were able to go through all the stuff, and you can also get gear for your other characters at the same time, but then that's also a downside because if you just want to play Captain Boomerang and you're getting gear for others, it's rather frustrating in that sense because you don't want that loot for them. You're missing out on a drop for yourself. Another quick bugbear is the fact that the animation for the loot is literally like sometimes bugs out, or you are spending 5 or 6 seconds to get the loot that you want for it all to show up, rather than having some like thing within the game that will just give you all of the loot, similar to how when you actually get the penguin gear and then you come out of that menu, there is a loot thing right there in front of you. It'd be easy for us to just access it rather than having to sit through the animation every single time. Now, I can already see the complaining about this early when it comes to the endgame content, when there's a lot of like infinite progression because there's the level up tree that gives you small stat boosts. You're basically just making the number go higher and doing more and more damage, but there's going to be a limiting factor at some point because you're going to be running the same missions over and over. And I thought maybe it might change when I hit Infinite Crisis level 30 and I go up against the first boss, which also left me incredibly disappointed because it's just the same boss, the end of the campaign boss again, just with double the health, and you need to do more damage to them, and then everything that's going on the screen is even more chaotic. And I thought maybe there'll be some different mechanics this time. Maybe they'll choose a different hero that we fight, and once we've gone through all the heroes, then they'll use a combination of both their powers or something along those lines. But it's just not. Maybe there's other Brainiac bosses that they have planned in future, but it's now. It's the base game that you paid the money for to play. I shouldn't have to wait 6 months down the line for there to be more endgame content and things that diversify what I want to play. It lasted literally an additional 10 hours or so. I may try out another character to see if I, enjoy the grind any different, because I don't necessarily think anything was wrong with Captain Boomerang. But yeah, it's just literally the same stuff that we did in the campaign, just a little bit harder with a little bit more health and on repeat, and it's just not that great. I was hoping for something more. I wanted to see something more. It's a decent start. It has more content in its end game than at least most games that had at launch, but then on top of that, it kind of doesn't, because it's just the same 6 mission presets over and over and over again with some additional tweaks. So yeah, I don't want to be unnecessarily negative or come across as trying to hate on the game, but I wanted to wait to see what Endgame was like, to see if it changed my opinion of the game, whether or not I'd actually love this game, or just kind of keep with the review and I can't recommend it. and I still feel that way. I can't recommend this game until it goes down in price, because the offerings there is not good at all. I know we have to wait until the battle pass and the seasonal stuff that we might get, and I'll try that out and maybe make a follow-up video. But yeah, I'm really disappointed with the end game of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. And yeah, I just thought I'd put it on the video, go off the riff, because scripting it all when I've got like some raw emotions would just be a little bit better. So thank you if you have watched this video. Please tell me your thoughts on the game, if you played it, if you haven't played it, if you are currently playing and going into the end game. Maybe we have something different, a different thing in opinion. Not all of my content is negative, so if you do want to check out more of the content, please subscribe, like the video if you did enjoy this somehow. And as always, this has been Shimbo, and I'll see you guys next time.